My name's Penny Snowball, and the documentary series entitled In Search of My Mental Health and The Road to Recovery. And in this part we're talking about breaking the cycle, really. Breaking the cycle, helping parents who are in addiction and who are having problems, and helping the parents so that actually that in turn helps the child, and so obviously on the longer term that helps society as a whole, instead of this kind of, what I experienced anyway personally, was almost like a shaming culture, you know, single parent, alcoholic, you know, kind of, you know, it was all kind of underlying shaming. But I suppose my anger and resentment was also, I have to be honest about, was that if you were two parents and you know, were quite sort of affluent, and you were going out and getting pissed every Saturday night or even drinking every evening, then there's no different to what I was doing. It's just that because I was on my own, it was looked at, I felt, in a very different way. Maybe that's just my head, but you know, that's definitely what it felt like anyway. I didn't have that protection of, well, we are a nuclear family, we look normal. You know, I was just battling with all the stuff that I was with myself, and I think I wanted to sort of expand that out really to your experiences as, you know, as parents and as, you know, both people in recovery yourselves, and just sort of talk about that.
I think it's quite interesting because my parents weren't alcoholic. In fact, my mother got tipsy at Christmas, and that was about it. And my father never ever got drunk. In fact, he'd have half of lager, and that would last him all evening, and there'd still be half of it left at the end of an evening. So, and they ran a pub. So of course, I didn't. My experience didn't come from there. I believe I became an alcoholic because I was very shy, and I found in my late teens that having a drink got rid of the shyness, and I became the life and soul of the party, as it were. So, but moving on from that, after having got married and gone into a marriage which for me was a marriage of convenience. Somebody said, "I like you," and because they said, "I like you," I married them.
Yeah.
And we
yeah.
had 3 children.
Yeah.
The relationship wasn't perfect to start off with, and the tension of that relationship just encouraged my drinking. And of course the children, in their own way, caught the worst of that. And so they were brought up by somebody who was trying to cope and wasn't very good at coping with an alcoholic and an alcoholic father, and that influence on them turned them. My children have all been dabbled in drugs. Luckily, my coming into recovery has enabled them to change that. And I believe that seeing me having made a recovery has encouraged them to stop using. And none of them are using at the moment. They do drink a bit more than I'd like, but that's none of my business. They are actually coping with life in a much better way. But at the time, when they were things were really bad, they weren't coping very well. And I had a son who was very heavily into cannabis. I had another son who was and still has a problem with food. He's an overeater, and my daughter drank quite a lot. So the impact on 3 of them was quite enormous.
And I think from my experience, think that it can be a terribly hard thing to work through, because there's that sense of guilt, and I've let them down, and they deserve so much better, and that awful shame, I'm a bad person, I'm a bad mother, reinforces maybe the worthlessness that you're thinking of, and I'm not good enough, which has driven you to use some sort of substance in the first place.
Yeah, definitely.
It can be very difficult to sort of get out of that self-hatred cycle.
Yeah, exactly.
I know I had a great feeling of inadequacy. I was never good enough.
Yeah.
And so therefore, although I mean, they never wanted for food. They were always dressed well. We had a reasonable home. We had the car. We had everything most people had. They still never felt good enough. And probably could have been better if I hadn't been drinking, actually. But the drinking was the only way I could cope with things.
Yeah, I can really identify with that. I definitely felt not good enough. I definitely didn't have the inner resources. I hated the fact that I drank. I tried to drink when my son was in bed. I thought, well, if I don't drink until he goes to bed, then it's all right, And I remember very clearly crossing the line. I drank after I came out of a therapy session. I was in such a bad place. I got off the train and went straight to the off licence. It was 4:00 in the afternoon and I couldn't wait to get home to drink. And I realised then that I'd really got a problem. And prior to that, I was kind of in denial, I suppose, all that. And yet that underlying shame and disgust that I wish I was doing this differently. I wish I wasn't in this situation. I wish I had a husband. I wish I was all of that. I wish, why aren't I normal? Why can't I have a normal life? What is wrong with me? Because everybody else is everybody else.
There is that though.
Everybody else is.
That's the way you think, isn't it?
Yes, of course.
In that situation, I know for me, I stood apart from everybody else.
Yeah.
I just wasn't like, I wasn't normal, I wasn't like anybody else. I didn't know anybody else like me.
No.
I knew there were drinkers, but I wasn't as bad as them.
Yeah.
But I knew most people were okay, and I wasn't as good as them. So there was me in the middle of this, they're bad, they're good.
Yeah.
And also, did you have that struggling with, why am I doing this?
Yes, absolutely.
What is wrong with me? Because I think we've spoken before about I was adopted.
Yeah.
And on the face of it, for years, I'd think, well, I don't know. I've got no reason, no underlying reason that I can think of. And it was only after I'd been in therapy for years that I started to get in touch with, perhaps it was very early on, and my natural mother had given me away. And perhaps that's not being good enough, having something wrong with me was all based on that. And although it might not be in my conscious awareness, it just gives you something. Perhaps that's it. It might not be, but it's just something that you can maybe start questioning and building on and, sort of start to move away from. Yeah. Perhaps she had her reasons. Yeah. But until it's in your conscious awareness.
I think it can be so minimal as well. Something that's said. I remember, and you saying that, it just brought back to me, one of the things my mother had said to me when I was fairly young, about 9 or 10, thinking that I would understand, probably not realising the impact on it. She said I was a mistake. Because they'd had 2 boys and a girl. My sister was a bit older than me, and she said I was a mistake. And of course, it just occurred to me, all that time. But I was then living as a mistake.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've always felt unwanted. It's always been in that very core of myself that my mother was a workaholic. I said, where was I? She always boasted or bragged that she worked 18-hour days when she was pregnant with my brother. And what I hadn't made the connection of was, hang on a minute, I was only a few months old. Where was I? Where was I? And it suddenly becomes conscious. Where was I?
In the great scheme of things, how important am I?
Well, nowhere. And I said, well, how were you looking after me? Well, you were in a cot by the side of my office or whatever. And I'm like, right. And then when I was a month old, I started having nannies, right up until I was 9 months. I had 4 primary caretakers by the time I was 9 months old, and they went and then they came and then they went. And one of them apparently was so bad that my auntie told my parents and they had to fire her. Don't know what that was about. What the hell was she doing to a baby, And it's all that, but I've spent years wondering what is wrong. Why do I feel so shit about myself? Why do I feel not wanted? It's just that horrible feeling inside that I don't belong. And when I did get a connection with my mother, it was like wonderment. And I held on to it as long as I could, and then she was gone again. And I felt like I was dying every time that happened. So to never have had that at all, that connection, You know, adoption, this is the other thing, isn't it, about people, which we can talk about later, about people being taken away from their parents because the state think that that's a better thing.
Yeah, because obviously I had adoptive parents
Yeah.
who were great and didn't do anything wrong, and so that made it even more baffling.
Yeah, I'm sure.
What's wrong with me?
Yeah, I'm sure it did. It must have been very difficult.
Yes, yeah.
I think one of the things, just because of the winding up thing, that parents, what the state needs to do and what they don't do is perhaps they should be at schools teaching children parenting skills.
And the impact of early
Yeah.
experience.
And the impact of that experience.
And also, and also I think instead of taking the parents away from their children, trying to help them stay together because of realising how important that is, that bond and that
educating
connection.
parents in that, yeah.
You know, educating parents of not, and also social workers. You know, how can we help the parents to stay with the children? What can we do? Because it's crazy. You go there, you go there, you go there. Nobody wins. Everybody ends up feeling, well, not everybody, but a lot of people feel, you know, if people are doing whatever they're doing, they've got problems. In my opinion, they need help. You know, to stay with the children. I'm all for that. I guess maybe that's because I didn't have that myself. It's something that I'm very aware of, acutely aware of what I'm lacking in my life. That love, that mother bond.
Yeah.